find love. Let's create that energy and that beauty in our lives. I love the New Orleans music and that sound. You may know I was in New Orleans in my young adult years from 18 to 21. I went to undergraduate school at Tulane University, so I went down and lived in New Orleans. People will often ask me, how'd you choose Tulane and New Orleans? And I say, for all the wrong reasons. But it was in the end, it was a great decision to go there. And there's something about New Orleans. I was listening to somebody who was speaking on the radio recently. I think he wrote a book. He's from Louisiana, rural Louisiana. And he talked about going into New Orleans with his parents and seeing his parents, in a new way. Because and I know that I had this experience. I think everybody who goes down there as a student and whose parents come to visit them, they have this experience. You go, at some point, you make your way down to the French Quarter and to Bourbon Street, and you hear this kind of music wafting out of the open windows of the clubs and the bars along Bourbon Street. And before long, you start noticing your parents, it doesn't matter how old they are, they start getting a little beat, going, and so they lift their arm, maybe they even twirl around a little bit on the street, out in front of everybody else. You're thinking, who are these people? I've known them my whole life, but I've never seen them dancing in the streets. But New Orleans brings that out in people, and I think one of the things that I think happens is that we end up with sort of three competing ideas when we have this moment. The one is, who are these people? The next is, oh my God, I hope nobody sees this. I'm so embarrassed. My parents are out dancing in the street. And then the third one is, I love this. I love seeing my parents, have a little swing in their hearts and in their souls, and that these are real people, and they, despite their age, and you start seeing your parents in a new way, and a lot of us do that around, as we grow up. But this idea of having competing ideas in our heads, different values that we're wrestling with. I've been thinking about that a lot lately because many of us have what we could call a false self, and then our real self. We build up a kind of a false identity over time in our ego and everything it may come from what our parents think we're supposed to value or believe, and we kind of pick it up from them, even though it doesn't necessarily resonate with our own deep truth. Sometimes it's because we find somebody that we're attracted to and we start acting a particular way to try to get them to like us, and we start trying on different things and parts of our personality that may or not be real for us. Sometimes we do it for a job. We do it at our job. We end up acting a certain way, dressing a certain way that might not be us. I might not be dressed like this today if I weren't standing up before you. But, as a minister, I probably wouldn't have a tie on Sunday morning if I wasn't up here. But it is who I am. I love this. I love what I do. It's not a false part of myself. But sometimes we end up going into a job and bringing part of ourselves. Sometimes friends do this, and sometimes church does this to people. They go in and they want to act like I'm a good church person, and people go to the church and they act a certain way. Even couples they'll come into the church. They'll be fighting the whole way to church in the car, but then they'll get out and they'll walk through the parking lot and act like everything's cool and we're good church people and everybody puts a smile on their face. But there's a false self and a real self, and part of growing up and part of really coming into our own is figuring out who am I really? And I think it's a lifelong process to figure out who we are. The other thing I remember a lot about being in New Orleans back at that age and stage in my life is, staying up until all hours of the night with some friends, philosophizing, solving all the world's problems. And some of it was just naivete. It was just, these people, the people running the world don't know what they're doing. If I were in charge, I would do it this way. And often we grow up and grow out of some of those ideas because we realize, wow, the world's a lot more complicated. Leadership's a lot more complicated than I realized. Sometimes we have ideas that maybe just, they might get crazier and crazier as the night goes on, depending on what we're imbibing at the time. But some of those ideas, or some of those ideals, I don't want to give up on. They're not naive, and they're not induced by alcohol or something else. These are beautiful ideas about how we can make the world better, and that we can do this differently than maybe those who came before us. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about, because We may not be able to change the whole world. I say may not, because maybe we could. Maybe someone said a small group of people might be the only thing that's ever changed the world. But maybe we can't change the whole world. But one thing we can change and affect and impact dramatically is this place, All Souls. What do we want to make out of this community? What kind of community do we want to have, and do we want to be a part of, and do we want to hand on to our children? This is our clubhouse. This is our community center. This is the center of our community, and we're the ones in charge. So we get to decide. And I think the pandemic in some ways kind of wiped the slate clean, so to speak. At least it opened a door for us to possibly do this a little bit differently if we want. And so we're going to be having some town hall meetings starting this month and throughout the year, initially to talk about what we want to do with our campus, and eventually we're going to be doing a visioning process for what we imagine All Souls' vision is going forward over the next 10 years. So this is going to be a really consequential year in the life of All Souls as we come through this pandemic onto the other side. But the other thing I think the pandemic did was it helped us realize that life can change like that. Life can end like that. And it's true, it's always been true. It's true all the time, pandemic or not. Life changes, life ends, things happen. And so we need to really appreciate, and I think some of us do more now than ever, the fact that we have the breath of life in us, that we are alive for this time. And we've always dreamed, whether it was 3 o'clock in the morning with friends or in our own minds from the time we were a little child, I want to do something with my life. I want to make a difference in how I live. And I want to be part of creating something beautiful. You know, we see people marching during the civil rights movement. Some of you were part of that. But a lot of the rest of us just watched it on TV or in movies, and we're like, I want to be a part of something, make the world better with my life, with my one precious life. I'm part of a Jewish Christian dialogue group here in the community with a group of ministers, rabbis, and others in the community. I've been doing this for years. Just this past meeting, this month, one of the pastors asked me, he said, now, I understand you have a humanist service at All Souls. And he said, I'm sort of confused about that. Now, if somebody doesn't believe in God, then, well, like, what does redemption mean? And so I love it when you tee me up like that, you know, in front of a whole group of ministers, that I get to tell them what I think about these things. And so I told them a story that I heard from a colleague named Forrest Church, late colleague named Forrest Church, who he talked about, he used the example of a coupon. You know, a coupon is something that we use, it only has value if we bring it into the store and use it, right? If you put it on the bottom of your bird cage, it really doesn't have any value other than, you know, as a liner for a bird cage. But if you bring it to the store, it could be worth $1, $5, $10. You can redeem it for its full value. And so what Dr. Church would say is we can redeem our lives for their full value if we use our life for its intended purpose. If we don't, if we sit quietly and don't do what's in our hearts to do, what our true self wants us to be in the world, if we don't do that, if we don't live that, if we don't figure it out even, then we die like a paper in the bottom of a bird cage. But if we use our gifts, our talents, our ideas, our love in ways that make the world a different and a better place, then we redeem our life for its full value. And I even think that these pastors love that idea, even if it were very different from the one that they had. So what I want to say about All Souls is that just this week, Randy mentioned that we had 4 members of our congregation who were inducted into the Tulsa Historical Society Hall of Fame. So there were 6 people inducted in the Hall of Fame. 4 of them were members of this church. You know, that's pretty great. I was really proud. I was really proud to be there. There was the Donna Dutton, Chip McElroy, his sister Peggy Tanner. They're great corporate philanthropists and individual philanthropists. They help with the gathering place. They help a lot with the food bank and have just done a number of great things. This congregation, they've done a lot to support All Souls over the years. And then the other one is Dennis Neal, and I see Dennis is here. I don't want to embarrass him, but Dennis, I was just so proud to see Dennis. Dennis actually mentioned All Souls. I really appreciate it. Dennis mentioned All Souls in his acceptance and said, this All Souls, I want to give a shout out to All Souls because All Souls, when I, 40 years ago, trying to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, very conservative state as an out gay man, All Souls was my church. And All Souls let me start an organization to help other gay and lesbian people who were being called abominations by their churches and by the wider society. And All Souls let me start that organization, which is now Oklahomans for Equality, right here in this church. Possibly the only church in town that would do that. And he was telling how the Tulsa World newspaper had a big article with a headline, "The homosexuals are organizing in Tulsa." And apparently the office, when they finally, after a number of months and they finally got a place of their own and the organization had solidified, they moved out. And apparently the church had been getting bomb threats and phone calls, tying up the phone, getting calls. And so it was a tough time. And so Dennis gave us a shout out. But I was thinking to myself, imagine that this week, Tulsa held up as one of its favored sons, Dennis R. Neal, not O'Neill, I heard that, Randy said O'Neill, R. Neal, a gay man who's made a difference for the gay, lesbian, transgender, and more communities here in Tulsa. This is the reddest of the red state. This is the most conservative, not only politically, but religiously, considered the buckle of the Bible Belt, and yet this week they held up Dennis R. Neal as a proud citizen that's made this place better, and I'm so proud of you, Dennis. Another thing that I was just sitting there, quietly at my table, but I was just beaming because then they invited others who had been inducted previously to stand. And they're naming all these names, and a quarter of those people were members of All Souls. We had Nancy McDonald and George Crumey, and Clayton Vaughn's daughter stood up to recognize him. And you know that my predecessor, John Wolfe, he's in the Hall of Fame. There's only, I think, 5 ministers in the whole city. Now, this is a city that has a church on pretty much every corner. And there's 5 clergy people who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame, having shaped the history of this city. And one of them is the senior minister of this church for 35 years, John Wolfe. I was so proud. And then one of the inductees was Eva Unterman, who you may know, a member of the Jewish community, who started the annual Holocaust Remembrance ceremony here in Tulsa. And she was being inducted. And she reminded me when I went up to congratulate her that they started and they met for the first 10 years here at All Souls doing this annual celebration for the city until it grew too big even for our sanctuary and our space. But I just realized All Souls was all over the place, that this church matters, that the people in this church try to live their lives in a way that makes a difference. And they are making a difference, and we are making a difference. And these people were doing it not alone, but they were doing it supported by a community of people, which is all the rest of us and what this place stands for. People living boldly and generously, and not alone, but together. That's All Souls, a community of generous souls who are making a difference and living inspiring lives. All Souls, I want us to be forever a center for people of all backgrounds who are creating new ways of valuing each other and the earth. We are needed more than ever right now. I want us to be a catalyst for relationships with our neighbors across faiths, across politics, across ethnicity, and all of those things, because we are more divided. People talking about civil wars. We are needed more than ever to be a place that can bring folks together for real dialogue, real connection, and real understanding. Now, some people are going to say, aren't we already doing enough? Marlin, I mean, come on. We give away the collection plate every week to organizations that make a difference in the world. In the past 12 months, our Community Resource Bank has distributed 75 tons of food to our neighbors who, during the pandemic, were struggling with food insecurity. 75 tons of food moved through this right here, this hall and the hall next door. We're going to have some refreshments in a little while. We've started more microcredit banks in Central America and South America than any other church that we know of. Over 30 microcredit banks that are not just giving people a hand out, but a hand up, teaching them how to run businesses and then share back into the community. And those just continue to perpetuate themselves over and over again. And we're going to keep doing all that. Our house committee, I see Hugh Burley's here and others, they have rehabbed over 200 homes for low-income folks who couldn't afford, sometimes were going to lose their home, and they came in with a team of people, and they helped to remodel and rehab the home in all kinds of different ways. And it's just, these are folks who are doing what they can do to make a difference, and some of you are volunteering in the schools and getting out the vote. I see Voting is Power there on Deanna's T-shirt, and so people are doing all kinds of things, but I also want us to fully recognize our potential to organize ourselves, to use our money and other things in a way that offers a prophetic critique of injustice in the marketplace and in the society. Think about this, that nature is a perfect organization. It's a perfect economy, if you will. Everything in nature uses only what it needs and gives something back to create this spectacular, interdependent world that we live in. Nothing else in nature hoards resources for itself far beyond what it needs to flourish, except for us. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains it this way. He says, happiness is not made by what we own. It's made by what we share. Happiness is not made by what we own, it's made by what we share. And why is that? Because that's how the whole rest of the natural world works. We've developed a false consciousness about what it means to be living organisms on the planet, and we're destroying the planet because of it. Because we're hoarding, using more than we need, keeping more than we need. And so instead, we have an economy that we say that human beings need to serve it. We need to serve the economy, but the economy should be serving us. And I want to make sure that whatever we do in this place, we create an economy that is more based like nature on how we can live together in harmony and share. So we may not be able to change the whole world, but what we can do is change how we organize our lives together. This church I want us to be an alternative economy, and it is already, by its very nature, a system not based on competition, but on cooperation. We have an economy that's not based on hoarding resources, but on sharing our resources. It's an economy that is not designed to create healthy profits, but to create healthy people. This is countercultural. This is a big deal. This isn't just like a thing that we do. This really makes a difference. And like that story that Shannon told to the children this morning. You know, the kid, he starts, his mom can't give me, she can only give him a stick. So he's like, all right, I'm happy with my stick, ticky-tack or whatever. He's playing the drums with his stick on the fences on his way to school. And then somebody needs a stick, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, you need it more than I do. And so then that person gives him some bread, and then he gives the bread, and then he gets the pot, and, pretty soon he gets a drum. I mean, just in the story, he gives what he can give. It's not going to destroy his life to give it. And yet, in the end, he gets his needs met. Everybody in the story gets their needs met because everybody gives what they can give. Nobody's giving something that's going to, make their life, destroyed. They just give what they can give so that together people can get their needs met. That's the economy of the church. That's the economy of All Souls. And that's how we do this. So it's the spirit of our congregation. There's no regulation. There's no taxation. So as we're about to kick off the campaign for 2023 about people giving, just know that we give what we can for the good of the community, knowing that if we do our part and other people do their part, we can create a great community with choirs and musicians and guest musicians and wonderful ministers and other folks, educators and storytellers. When Shannon was up here telling that story a little earlier, I was thinking, she was sort of moving her hips, Did you see that? I was kind of having that New Orleans experience with her this morning. I was like, I haven't seen her dance like that. She's got a little swing inside her. I was loving that. So we have great people here in this community, Rick Fortner, David Smith, all the wonderful people that make this possible. And you make it possible for us with your financial support. It's not a quid pro quo economy. Some of the people who give the most, they ask for the least. Some of the people who give the least, they end up gaining the most. It doesn't matter. And nobody's mad. And nobody's getting mad at each other. Everybody's like, you do your part, I do my part. And this place will be here when I die, or you die, or somebody's in the hospital, or we're celebrating the birth of a new life, and we're going to keep teaching our children sex education and religious education and all the other stuff they won't teach in schools. Because this place is going to be here with what we call a free pulpit, even if it's just a bistro table. It's a free pulpit. It's a place where we meaning you, say that the ministers up here are going to have the freedom to say what they want. They're not beholden to some pope. They're not beholden to some Bible. They're not beholden to anything. It's the truth that they understand through the fire of the witness of their own lives and the lives that they share with us and one another. And they bring that forward, and we say this little space here and in the sanctuary is going to be the freest 3-foot square in Oklahoma. If it has to be the whole country, if it needs to be. But it's only here because you protect it, because you make it possible. In 2 weeks, we're going to do a service. 2 Sundays from now, we're going to do a service all based in banned books. And you're going to fall off your chair when you hear some of the stuff, the inspiring things that kids can't even read now in schools, or you can't even get in libraries in Oklahoma or across the country. So it's going to be a really inspiring service, but we're going to read the banned books because nobody can tell us here what we can read and what we can't read. And I love that about this place. It's a deeply spiritual thing to live with this kind of trust that if I give what I give, if people give what they give, and I'm not judging what someone else is giving. We're giving what we can give, and we're creating the community we can create, and that's what we do. It's a deeply spiritual trust. It's the best of what it means to be human. That's what it is for me. It's the best of what it means to be human, that we share our lives rather than hoarding our lives and our resources. In the words of author Kent Nerburn, such giving is not an economic exchange. It's a generative act. It does not subtract from what we have. It multiplies the effect that we can have in the world. That's it. That's all I want to say today, is that there are ways that we build up a kind of a false sense of self about, like, I need to keep this stuff, and I'm greedy, or I'm this, or I'm that. You know what? Ultimately, I think our true nature is to be like nature, to give what we can give, to take back what we need, to continue to let the system happen. And this is what I want to pass on to our children. This is what I want to pass on to the next generation. This is what we need. The earth needs people living like this. And who knows who else will get impacted and changed by this. But I know that we can do it right here amongst ourselves. We're already doing it in many ways. And I look forward to this being a great year together. We're building back after the pandemic. It's not that this place used to be even more packed. We're still building our way back. And appreciate all that you can do to support us as we do that. Invite your friends, give in whatever way you can, whether it's with a hammer, with financial support, whatever you can do, but just help us to build back, because this city needs All Souls. It needs it to be thriving. It needs a place for people like the Kendra and Chris's children and our children to grow up and to learn these things, learn the best of what it means to be human. Thank you. That's all I have to say this morning. You just see why they're being called the hottest band in Tulsa right now, because they are on fire, man.